Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
Well, boys, it's Joever. The biggest news of the weekend that everyone's talking about. Very obviously, I'm referencing the Detroit Red Wings and Joe Veleno ending their arbitration case and settling on a 2-year contract. What else would I be referring to? Joe Veleno remains a Red Wing for 2 years, and a lot more kind of, not public outcry, but a lot more opinion and angst, I would say, from the fan base than I was expecting for this compared to the other Joever announcement.
I knew how you were going to start this episode because you told me. I'm still disappointed.
That was good.
It was.
Was it not?
That's why I'm disappointed, because I didn't do it.
Oh, yeah. Well, usually you start with the corny jokes. You had quite enough fathering that we witnessed today. I thought I'd give you a little bit of a rest from that. Anyhow, welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, folks. We are down to one episode a week, but we are still here with you through the offseason. I'm one of your hosts to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and more, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
You made it just in time.
Just in time, baby.
Oh, boy, that yawn was close. Here on this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we're going to be talking to you about Joe Veleno's contract, what it means for the Red Wings, whether it was an overpay or whether it was appropriate for the player, what his outlook is as a player, and what this means for other aspects of the Red Wings cap. Their cap situation with Seider, Raymond, and Berggren unsigned, how much cap space they're working with, a potential buyout window, all of that and lots more. We have some NHL news from across the league. Daniel Sprong, now former Red Wing, has signed in Vancouver. Kuznetsov has gone to Russia, and other various pieces of news before we jump into overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know that the Winged Wheel Podcast is proudly brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. If you want to join the so-called Dub Club, as Steve Dangle named it so very long ago, you get access to some great benefits like our bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones. We let loose, have fun, answer any questions that don't make the main show, and just generally have a good time. We also give you access to our bonus off-season episodes, which will start up pretty soon here. So even though we're down to one episode a week of the main show, we're going to be doing some extra content from our patrons, just like we do every summer. More evergreen conversations. For example, one that's going to be coming up is Evan and I are going to throw down on our opinions on the salary cap and whether or not it should exist. It's going to be a good time, and we generally, it's less of the news of the day and more just kind of those evergreen conversations. It's really fun. You also get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord, which is a fantastic community to keep you occupied through the off season and during the season. And you're also automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, we give away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, the vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. So Joe Veleno elected for salary arbitration, and that process was going to happen over the next month or so, depending on when he was scheduled. And the Red Wings and Veleno elected to settle before his hearing on a 2-year, $2.275 million contract. So another short-term deal. He expires as an RFA. I believe the Red Wings have 1 more year of team control after that, but Veleno remains a Wing for the next 2 seasons. What were your initial reactions to the contract and how that went down?
It was capital F fine. I don't think it was a deal by any means. I don't think it was a horrible overpay. You know, a 4th-line center who can plug and play anywhere else in your lineup that you need him outside of maybe goalie, although some nights. It's okay. It's only 2 years. My big thing with depth players is always term. Don't give depth players term because you never know when it could really go south. And yeah, it's probably 400, 500,000 over what I would have personally given him. But he had arb rights. He had a decent case. I think the Red Wings were probably worried if it went to arbitration, Michael Rasmussen's contract would have really hurt them because I think Veleno had 1 or 2 less goals than Rasmussen, and he's making about $1 million more. Not that they're the same player, but either way, it could have been used as a comparison. I mean, it's fine. He's not a below average NHL 4th liner, and I am so far past the point of being able to complain about $400,000 or $500,000. Like, I just can't be bothered to care at this point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I'm okay with it.
I look at Joe Veleno, and yeah, personally, when it came in, I thought, yeah, titch higher than I expected. And then I also remembered the previous contract where Veleno really didn't get the term or the money that he was hoping for. So I wonder a little bit if the Red Wings kind of retroactively paid a little bit of a price there. It's not traditionally what you think in terms of the logistics of this, but with it expiring with team control again, I wonder if they paid a little bit of a premium to say, okay, Joe, instead of walking you to free agency, we want the team control and we'll give you a little extra for that. So that's kind of what I figure went into this. But like you said, Brad, my initial reaction was, yeah, if a bit higher than expected, it wasn't insane in terms of how much. Now, there's a lot of, opinion and there's a lot of reaction to it for people who thought it was a big overpay for someone who could, let walk, or you could trade him and you could have a replacement level player do the same thing. And I think there's an argument for that. But in general, the Red Wings, and I tend to agree with this, see Joe Veleno as a useful depth player. He's still young. The team retains control. They hope for a little bit more out of him. And is he ideal to plug higher in your lineup? No, but you could have worse options. So I don't mind a little bit of an overpay on the small contract like that. And I also, for the sake of rounding out the opinion, I don't mind overpaying your high-end players either. It's really the middle of the road long-term contracts that burn you more. So I'm probably going to get burned for saying I feel okay about the deal. And there's probably a lot of really good argument about that. But yeah, to me, it's, you like Joe Veleno as a player. You hope he's a mainstay in your bottom six. You hope there's a little bit of room for improvement there, but he has utility all over the ice. And if that's what it takes to keep him for a couple of years, then that's fine. And honestly, it kind of makes him a prime trade candidate too.
Yeah, I don't really understand the outrage on this one. Maybe it's because everybody's just pent up waiting for the Seider and Raymond signings, that when they saw one come across the wire and it was Joe Veleno, they're like, not today. This is not the one we want. We're going to go and rage on this. I don't know. I don't understand, like you said, Brad, I don't understand how people can get so in a mood about maybe $300,000-$400,000 extra. Everyone knows that Joe Veleno is a useful player on this team. They move him up and down the lineup. It's not like they added a UFA in Joe Veleno. He was already on the team, so he's not taking up another roster spot that would have been hopefully reserved for one of the young players coming up. I really have no problem with this signing at all.
One of the things that I think happened in the immediate aftermath, and just for a stupid reference, I remember back way long time ago reading a story about how A&W tried to compete with McDonald's quarter pounder. So they came out with a third pounder, but it flopped because a majority of the country thought it was actually less.
This is prime off season.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
1,000%. Because I genuinely think if this contract was 2.3 instead of 2.275, the reaction, initial reactions would have been less.
Season.
I'm not going to lie. When I first looked at it, I went 2.75. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that extra 2 that was just in there, shimmied in there, that made it a little more palatable.
Our brains are fried, man. TikTok ruined.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, we just glance over everything.
You get 3 digits out of me, and I can't guarantee which 3 digits I'm going to read.
And I think in general, like how much he was overpaid, I actually wonder what it might be, because the cap going up too changes that a little bit. So I'm still resetting my internal compass, so to speak, of what proportionally is an appropriate number for, a Veleno type player or a Cop type player or a Seider type player. But in general, like the line of $300,000 or $400,000 overpay isn't that big of a deal. I actually think that we probably could find a ton of clips of us contradicting ourselves to say that is a big deal if you let that compound. But my thought, like you said, Brad, because it's shorter term and because it's debatable how much you overpaid him, and it's with depth rather than, 5 years or 6 years for a player who's making a lot more, that's what makes it, if it came in a titch higher than I thought, I'm still kind of whatever about it.
Where I'm at is, you can complain about it, perfectly justifiable. One thing, though, then you're not allowed to love Michael Rasmussen's contract and hate Joe Veleno's. I'm sorry, they're too similar of players to separate them by too many degrees. But there's near a half dozen players on this team who are overpaid by $1 million+. Like, if you're going to be mad, yeah, death by 1,000 cuts, but there's about 5 machete wounds on the roster, on the salary cap sheet for this team already. So again, I'm not worried about $400,000 or $500,000. Like, that's not what's make or breaking the team. And if it is, every mistake you made before that was way more impactful than this one.
So VELENO'S outlook as a player, I mean, last season was statistically his best season, but still not, an earth-shattering stat line. 12 goals, 16 assists, 28 points in 80 games. His previous high was 20 points, before that 15. So steady improvement. Where is Joe Veleno's ceiling in terms of where he fits into the roster and what he can actually do in terms of output on the ice? And then where else does he contribute other than the score sheet?
I think what needs to happen for Joe Veleno to have a career with the Red Wings beyond this contract is some improvement offensively. We know he can shoot. We know he can finish. Like, 12 goals for a fourth liner is good. Like, straight up, any fourth liner getting north of 10 goals, you're generally happy. 16 assists isn't bad either. You hope he can get up to that 30, 35 point range. Where I'm intrigued on Veleno is they've never really used him on the penalty kill regularly, whereas you would think his skill set lends well to that. So if he can carve out a niche as a regular penalty killer, I think that changes his dynamic on this team, but it hasn't happened yet. And, the Red Wings lack a lot of offense, but they don't lack penalty killers. So who knows if he'll even get that chance in the next 2 years.
With what Evan mentioned with young players, is he blocking a spot? Assumed no, but some people think, Veleno, if you moved on from him, that would open up something for Danielson and Casper or Mazur sooner. What do you think in terms of the pipeline being a bit clogged up?
If you can't waive a $2.2 million player to get a genuinely promising prospect in your lineup, you have bigger problems than Joe Veleno.
Okay, that's Joe Veleno's outlook. And in terms of what this means for the Red Wings, because they settled an arbitration case, they now have a 48-hour buyout window that starts 3 days after the arbitration settlement or award. So the Red Wings had a settlement, so they now get a 48-hour window to buy out a player. The thing is, the only contracts that are eligible to be bought out in this arbitration-specific window are those for players with cap hits greater than $4 million, and they had to be on your roster at the last trade deadline. So Justin Holl is the player people are thinking about the most, and he's not eligible. But Ville Husso, Ville Husso is. So that's going to be interesting to watch. It's notable that the Red Wings announced this basically a day after it got leaked. Elliot Friedman reported it. And the Red Wings as an organization, when they get a sense that something's about to leak, they just go with it. And the Red Wings waited a full day on this one. So I wonder if waiting to register it with the league was something about buying time to work on something in the back end. You mentioned pre-show, Brad, that obviously Steve Yzerman's been trying to offload a contract this entire time, but a buyout window now, and is Ville Husso up for grabs here in terms of Steve Yzerman letting go of a contract?
Yeah, I think there's probably one other guy that will get some thought to it, but I think everybody will quickly come to the realization it's not worth it. So I think it's Husso or nothing. That's a tough one because you feel bad for the guy because it's been mostly injuries that have sewered him, not necessarily poor performance, because you can tie a lot of his poor performance to the injuries. But you have Seider and Raymond and only 17 mil and change to use.
Sign those two in Berggren. 17 point, I'll read out the exact number per Puckpedia right now, 17.648194. So almost 17,650,000 in projected cap space. And they have Moritz Seider, Lucas Raymond, and Jonatan Berggren unsigned.
Berggren won't take up very much of that, but I have a hard time seeing Seider and Raymond taking less than 8.5, 8 for both of them on a long-term deal. So Husso's contract could be the difference between getting Seider and Raymond each locked up to a 7x3 or an 8x9.
Now, I think this is ultimately the most relevant if Yzerman's going long-term with both Seider and Raymond, which depends on both of those players wanting to do so. So if they're bridging one or both, then it's ultimately way less relevant, and we're having a different conversation about cap outlook, but it shouldn't be hard. Like, this Husso window's an opportunity, and it shouldn't be hard one way or another. It might be pricey, it might be unenjoyable, but you should be able to clear the cap to fit both those guys in long term. And frankly, if you have an opportunity to sign Moritz Seider and Lucas Raymond long term, you make a tough decision to take that pain, because that, as you've mentioned previously, Brad, that is the ultimate win of the offseason if you can get both those guys on long term deals.
Yeah, I figure for Berggren, Seider, and Raymond, you'll probably need 18.5 to 19 mil. So it's not like you're going to need a ton of contracts out the door in order to make those work. But what would be more beneficial, a Husso buyout versus giving up a second round pick to unload a Holl? Or, I don't think the Red Wings are in a position where they can move another good player to free up some cap room. If that's the only way, so be it. But with Husso being a potential buyout candidate here, I still think that makes more sense. But like you said, if ultimately one of them does end up on a bridge deal anyway, well, there's no sense buying out Husso. Why add to your future cap if you're not going to use it now? So this could be actually a pretty good indication of where negotiations are at with Seider and Raymond, because if they do use it, then you have to figure a couple long-term deals are on the horizon. And if they don't, it's probably safe to assume one of them is going, or both are going to bridge.
And you look at Husso's $4.75 million, and you look at the fact that it's Husso, Talbot, Lyon, not to mention Campbell down in Grand Rapids, and like the outside like moonshot of what if Sebastian Cossa just takes a meteoric leap this year. Something has to happen with goalies, so that's why everyone's paying attention to this specifically. But I agree, it's not as much of a squeeze in terms of like you're locked in. It'll be a squeeze money wise, and there's something to be said about how close you are to the cap, considering how close you are to actually being a playoff contender. That's a different discussion, but you can work this. It's not the worst situation in the world. And put something, we should have a jar in front of us that says the cap is going up jar, but the cap is going to go up again next year and maybe even more after that.
Imagine how this fan base, actually forget the fan base, imagine how Christopher Illich might react if they're a cap team that finishes 11th place in the East, which is very on the table.
It's very on the table. Like the range of outcomes for this team is borderline. You might be looking at lottery if things go poorly in terms of injury or player performance, or you could be doing the same thing you did last season where you're scaring the playoffs again. We talked about that in previous episodes. Like, this is not going to be a perennial playoff team, but there's avenues and opportunities for overperforming and underperforming. That is Joe Veleno's signing. That is the Husso buyout window potentially, and the cap situation is taking shape a little bit. Now, you said, Brad, what it might cost for those two. Seider or Raymond, if you get 8 years on both, that's an $18 million minimum, right, you think?
Ballpark, that's what I figure, yeah. 9 each, give or take, about 500,000 would be my prediction.
So you might need 20 million plus, depending on what you sign Berggren to, or how much of a premium you're paying for Seider and Raymond as well.
I have a hard time seeing Berggren getting more than league minimum, like a lot more than league minimum. It's not out of this world, but if they just gave Joe Veleno 2.2, who's been in the NHL for years now, versus a guy who just spent a year in the AHL, he shouldn't have before you all start yelling at me, but that's the reality of how this negotiation is going to go. Like, what would be the high end of what Berggren gets here? 1.3?
There's also how much does he doesn't have a lot of control, but how much is he wanting to even continue his future in Detroit? Do you think he's maybe in the behind the scenes, hoping for a change of scenery, because he wasn't happy that he wasn't up, and that was hardly a secret. It didn't take a lot to get that out of Berggren last season, so that could also be factoring into this.
I think we've all at some point over the last year said if we were in his shoes, yeah, we would prefer to be somewhere else, because he's NHL ready. There's no doubt about that. And having to spend your, age 23, 24 season in the AHL again?
Yeah.
That's tough.
So the contract projection for Berggren, like you mentioned, Brad, is from Evolving Hockey, 1 year, $1.022 million. So just a bit over league minimum.
That would be a fantastic contract if you can get relatively decent production out of Berggren.
Which you should be able to. The question with Berggren has never been the production. You're trying to replace a little bit of what you lost in Sprong, which we will talk about later, but it's been the other aspects of his game defensively or in transition or whatever you want to talk about. But yeah, offensively, you should be able to get it. And if you're going to have to replace goals, then you put them in, favorable offensive zone starts or power play time. And yeah, that Berggren can and will give you that. So yeah, I'm curious to see how those negotiations are going. But 3 RFAs remaining: Seider, Raymond, Berggren. And it's funny that you mentioned that, Evan, because if you asked Red Wings fans which one they cared about the most, I think VELENO'S would have been bottom of the list.
Yeah.
But with the nature of arbitration, you had to handle that one essentially on a timeline at this point. And I don't think Steve Yzerman was, arbitration's a touchy thing. If it goes to a hearing, it is ugly in there. That is lawyers. And for professional athletes to sit in a room and hear from their employer why they should be making less than what they want, and they are bringing up evidence, and they're bringing up comparables on why they're worse than what the player is claiming they are. That's tough. And athletes have a different mindset than us. They think they are the best player on the ice, or often they think they can be the best player on the ice. And that's a mindset you have to have as a professional athlete. And there have been a lot of stories of players who have gone through the arbitration hearings and the relationship with the team soured after that. There's actually a statistic I don't have in front of me, but a high proportion, higher than you might think, of players who get an arbitration award from, the adjudicator, from the arbiter. They don't stay with that team X number of years after. Think of Bertuzzi for a Red Wings example. That is a painful process.
My favorite arbitration story still goes back to the 90s when Mike Vernon was with the Red Wings. And he had this unfortunate highlight where I think someone dumped a puck in from the red line and just took a weird hop and trickled through his legs. The all-time gaff type of goals.
Yeah.
And I remember watching the old Don Cherry Rock'em Sock'em videos, and they showed the clip, and Don says, Scotty Bowman showed this at his arbitration hearing.
That was the old school unhinged stuff you got from Don Cherry, where you're like, yeah, this is why people tune in.
Oh, 100 entertainment value. Nobody can ever question that about that guy.
Yeah. And then you'd get days where he'd call Nick Lidstrom a classless European, or I think it was. And you're just like, okay, Don. Anyhow, a contract you brought up off air, Brad, in terms of, this could be a scary outcome. Quinton Byfield with LA, who seems to be in the mix of the players compared, the Stützle, Byfield, Raymond, those guys are often lumped together in those graphics you see on social media. But Byfield signed a 5-year deal with LA for $6.25 million. And Byfield seemed to have emerged last season. He had a slower start, as, most rookies do, even if they're talented and people are ready to give up on him. And now he's kind of come on in force for LA. But he is he's earned his money, and he's now being walked right to unrestricted free agency when that deal expires in 5 years. What do you think about that as a comparable in terms of what a bridge may look like for Raymond, for example, if he took a 4-year deal and was walked to unrestricted free agency?
Well, that'd be worst case scenario. I saw a lot of people were big on the Byfield contract, and I don't see why. Well, I guess I shouldn't say that because I'm looking at it through Red Wings lenses, but
you could sign Quinton Byfield in 5 years.
Yes.
Oh my God, yeah.
Great point. LA, whether or not they actually are, they think they're in their cup window right now. So having a really good player of that caliber at that cap hit is very valuable to them for 5 years, but then they are absolutely screwed at the end of it because they're either paying him $1 billion or he's walking, and they don't get to keep the player at all. With Lucas Raymond, the whole advantage and disadvantage to a bridge would be if you do it for, say, 3 years. Well, the advantage is he can't go anywhere at the end of it, right? You retain his rights. But that next dollar figure is going to be substantially higher.
Because you're buying almost all UFA years.
Exactly. Whereas, but at least, he's still yours at the end of that deal. Even if he pulls an Alex DeBrincat and goes, I'm just taking my qualifying offer and I'm out of here in a year, you can trade him and get something back, right? There's benefits to having a player as an RFA versus a UFA. So that little gap in time frame is significant. That's why LA got such a good cap hit on Byfield, because they know what they're conceding on the other end of that. If I'm Steve Yzerman, I am not negotiating anything less than 6 years or more than 3 years. That 4 or 5 window is an absolute non-starter. Don't even bring it up. Don't talk about it. We're not signing it. It could be $4 million a year. We're not doing it.
There's advantage of bridging. no matter the length, the advantage is you sign them for less, right? You're not buying UFA years. It's less expensive for you, and you have cap flexibility in the short term. But the point that's come up time and time again, it's going to come up all offseason, is there's advantage to that cap space in short term, and you have to be real about what the Red Wings situation is now, of course. And I think it's better to have cap space than not. But that cap space is less important now when you're not a cup team or a perennial playoff team. Now, I think you can use that cap space to bring yourself to the level of being a playoff team. I've really come around on, you make acquisitions on players via trade or signing to just elevate the level of your team, and you figure it out as you go. As Evan likes to say, you're laying down the track as you're going. That's a little bit of what the Red Wings have to do because Yzerman inherited a god-awful franchise in terms of their contract situation and also got no lottery luck. But at the same time, you don't want to be doing that too much. And the real dagger would be losing them in unrestricted free agency for nothing as a worst case scenario. We've been talking about it. Kyle Dubas and how he handled the Toronto major contracts with Marner and Matthews and just basically gave no inch. Those players gave no inch to the Leafs, and the Leafs had no choice, or so they thought, but to capitulate to those contract demands. Their AAV, their cap structure was cooked. They didn't use or execute on any of the leverage they had, and that's why the term matters so much here. On a longer term, you're almost, I don't want to say you don't care about the money, but the range of what's acceptable is way bigger because at least you're buying up so many of those years for really cheaper because the players are going to get better.
And again, I don't know if you've heard the cap's going up.
Money in the jar. How many notches are in the table?
Yeah,
there?
no kidding.
It's like that Community episode.
Well, we're about to lose one of the legs of the table. That's where we're at.
Hey, those are hockey goalposts. That'd be impressive.
I mean, coming back to Quinton Byfield, I think, has he kind of played his hand and, now he's trying to maximize his earning potential and time the cap and walk himself right to UFA. Those are the great unknowns we don't know about Seider and Raymond. And maybe it will take these contracts to really know how that's going to line up for their career. Like if they sign a bridge deal, they're going to get a lot of money in the next deal. If they sign a long-term contract, we kind of know what their mentality is towards their career, right? So I think right now, until we see something, it's really hard to speculate on how this is going to go.
The indication that you get based on what Yzerman said publicly was that he would prefer to do long-term on Raymond at the right price. And he didn't talk about Seider in the answer to that question, but you can extrapolate and assume the same, more or less. And if you look at the player perspective, it's, yes, every player would like to walk themselves right to unrestricted free agency. Of course, everyone would like to have their cake and eat it too. But even more so, there's the context now of get your little notching tool ready. The cap is going up and these players would like to cash in again. So bridging for them means that even if they are signing with 1 year of RFA rights still with their team, it'll be with a higher cap hit. So they'll have more dollars in hand. And it's like the other side of the coin of you had all the benefit of flat cap for years. If you're the team, then you don't have to pay your players as much, but now players are wise to that, agents are wise to that, and they're trying to cash in. So I'm sure the Red Wings would love to be able to have them long-term. Both of them. Remains to be seen. That's the Red Wings. That's the cap structure. We'll see what happens with a potential buyout window and if and when the remaining 3 in the major 2 RFA contracts come in. Let's jump into some NHL news here. Evgeny Kuznetsov, former Capitals star, did a little bit of wandering after that, terminated his NHL deal. He is going to Russia. Kind of out of the blue, changes the game for Carolina, gives him some cap money to work with. His NHL story is over, at least for now, I guess.
I'd say likely for good. He hasn't been on the rise in the NHL. Although he was surprisingly effective once he got to Carolina. So a little surprised he didn't stick it out for one more year. But given his situation and the type of personality he has, I can see the appeal of going back to Russia on a lucrative deal. I get it.
Other NHL news. Much smaller contract than the $6 million one that Kuznetsov walked away from. But Daniel Sprong, former Red Wing, signed with the Vancouver Canucks on a 1-year deal south of $1 million. It was $975,000. A lot of people will be wondering, for that efficient of a scorer, why didn't the Red Wings bring him in?
Because they didn't play him for the last month of the season. Daniel Sprong came exactly as advertised. A lot of offense, very high volume shooter. I think in his mind, the defensive zone was still in the theory phase. Didn't do much of anything back there. And you can see why coaches didn't trust him. Now, we could have a long philosophical discussion of, do you want your fourth line to be a bunch of defensive guys who don't bring anything, but you know that they're not going to give up anything easy? Or do you want to put more Sprong types on there and get some goals out of it while also giving up a decent amount? Neither here nor there. But this is what, his sixth team in like 6 years or something close to that? Yeah, if no coach can trust the guy, what does anybody expect at this point?
It's crazy to see the price he came in at, to me. Not that I think Daniel Sprong is a world beater by any means, but I don't know if he thought he was going to get more money than what he did, or just like didn't play the market right. Because I thought for sure a guy who at least scored as many goals as he did last year, there'd be teams that would offer him, a few $1 million. But man, the fit must have been just so bad in Detroit in terms of off-ice relationships that teams probably knew about it and were saying, hey, we know what you are. This is your sixth team in 6 years. This is what we can give you, and it's not much.
You're exactly right that that's what the teams did. So first off, on the fit, it became evident in the latter phases of the season, let's say the last third of the season, that the fit with the Red Wings, like he disagreed on how the Red Wings were using him. The Red Wings disagreed on his interpretation of how he played outside of the offensive zone, to put it gently. And they didn't see eye to eye. It didn't take a lot of interpretation just on how the Red Wings were using him to understand that, but also you look in the background and what was going on behind the scenes, and we heard a lot of they didn't see eye to eye, and it was assumed pretty early on that Sprong wouldn't be back because the coaches just didn't feel that they could trust him to be on the ice. Like, yeah, he scores efficiently for you, but the thought was, how much is he going to cost you on, like, all over the ice unless the puck is on his stick in the offensive zone? And it's a tough calculation too, but you're right, Evan. Other teams see it the exact same way, because the way it went, I was talking to people who are very familiar with the Sprong negotiations. He had interest from a lot of teams. Boston was in on this. I know the Rangers were in on this. Montreal and Toronto kicked around on it. But of all those teams, including Vancouver and anyone else who had a contract out for him in terms of a potential offer, none of them met his wants of term and more money. They didn't even come close. He got a 1-year deal for less than what he got in Detroit. Like that, he is trending in the wrong direction in terms of buying a team's trust to give him any term or an appreciable sum of money. And the cap went up too. So the book is out on Sprong in terms of what you're going to get from him. That's why we said so confidently towards the end of the season he's not going to be back. And you can have interest from a lot of teams, but those teams are, in my opinion, like, they played it smart. They said no one's going to play you in a middle six role or a power play one role like you're asking for, and they're certainly not going to pay you like that. Here's your offer. We're a strong team. You're going to get not a ton of minutes like you have so far in your career, and you're going to be asked to score in a depth way, and you're not going to be trusted to be on the ice a lot like you want. And so it's a tough ride for Sprong, but that was kind of how this was playing out the whole time. And the fact that such an efficient scorer went this late in the process just kind of demonstrates that was the case, right?
I too want to get paid more for a longer amount of time.
That'd be great. I would, you know what? I will swallow my pride, though. If any NHL team wants to sign me to a 1-year deal, I'll take sub $1 million. I'll take one for the team.
Those poor fans.
Are you kidding me? That'd be the show of their lives for one shift, and then I'd be hurt for 82 games.
81 games.
That's right. Yeah, 81 games. But Daniel Sprong is gone. Represents, a loss of scoring for the Red Wings. Like you mentioned, Brad, like, there's a larger discussion here in terms of what do you want from your depth role. But to me, I don't really disagree. Like, Sprong towards the end, was he a net positive that much for your team?
He wasn't even scoring that much down the stretch, so his value, though very one way, wasn't even really there. Now, he wasn't getting played a ton. He wasn't getting put out in prime power play opportunities. He wasn't playing many minutes, and quality of line mate left a little bit to desired, but that's just the Red Wings bottom six in general. So, yeah, I don't know what to make of why that went that way, but I'm going to guess a bit of a confidence hit with a bit of a coach's trust issue just created this perfect storm of creating an irrelevant player.
Other NHL news, Torrey Krug could be out for the entire season with pre-arthritic conditions, could need some kind of procedure that would leave him out for the year, which is a big hit to, obviously the player would be incredibly unfortunate. I wonder how this changes any outlook or perspective for St. Louis and what they might do with their money, but Krug has been, ever since he signed, hasn't wanted to move, has basically exercised his right to avoid any thought of a trade or anything, but kind of a fall from the heights that he was at with Boston.
I know we've touched on it, but St. Louis's defense was arguably the worst in the NHL in terms of the age, the contracts, and the actual value you get out of them. St. Louis didn't look like a team that was going to be spending to the cap this year anyway. So I don't think this changes a whole hell of a lot for them. You obviously feel for Krug because that is a tough break that you don't want to see any NHL player go through. But the silver lining here might be it might force St. Louis into finally doing what they've needed to do for a couple of years now, which is, hey, start accumulating some top 10 picks.
Other news in the NHL. We've mentioned this before, this whole Major League Hockey idea. There's been some really great reporting by Brad Elliott Schlossman, and I'll link to his article in the Grand Forks Herald. It is a great piece, really good kind of investigative sports journalism. He is the leading voice on this so far. Schlossman is, and has put out the most information, has uncovered that Max Chambers is the guy behind basically the public-facing idea of it. There's been dispute as to where the money is coming from. He said, or there's conversation about it coming from a European source. A lot of folks wonder if this is like Live 2.0. But Max Chambers isn't a stranger to those who have heard of him making grand promises in the hockey space. Bringing a lot of money in for, buying a team or now starting a new league. He's talking about, 10 billion Canadian dollars, I think, in terms of funding, and it's talking about $30 million salary cap per team and, having offers out to pro players. There's someone apparently in the Cup finals who was considering or was at least interested to know more about a potential contract. It's very interesting to watch, and the parallels between that and the Live situation in golf. It's so loud in my head. Like you almost think people ignored the Live thing for so long because they said, that's not serious. And here we are.
Well, if there's any North American professional sports league that would be prime for the picking, it would be the NHL, because the PIF would vastly outspend what the NHL is even capable of doing.
If that is the source of the money, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people have their eyebrows raised because Chambers apparently is, he's fallen through a million times, and there have been a lot of empty promises and things like that. But I encourage you to go read the article. Whether or not this comes through, I agree, Evan. I think the NHL is kind of ripe for the picking because it would be not hard to outspend them. And sports franchises are printing money. Like that is the new venture for billionaires and billionaire conglomerates. So what is the easy way to break into a major sports league in terms of, acquiring franchises or rights to a league or whatever? Hockey is probably one of the lower rungs. The NFL is the biggest individual sports product in the world. You won't compete with them. Major League Baseball and the NBA are still both ahead of the NHL. That might be the way to do it. And so the NHL has to take risks like this seriously, even if this one specifically isn't going to be, the danger or come to fruition.
You're absolutely right. Gary Bettman won't. And I love to see a world where, not that I could really envision any league ever fully overtaking the NHL, But much like the WHA back in the day, who ultimately lost out to the NHL, it did force the NHL into modernization in a lot of ways. So I wouldn't hate if a league pushed the NHL to modernize in the ways we all know we need them to modernize. But the one thing that immediately jumps to my mind in this situation is, you remember, I think it was around 03, 04, when they tried to revive the WHA?
Oh, I forgot about that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's my thoughts on this situation. The guy running it, the shadiness around it, the lack of any actual information. I'm a pessimistic person by nature, so I tend to err on the side of caution, even in legitimate situations. There are so many red flags jumping out of this one. The building these guys are in should look like what the LCA should look like with red seats.
Hell yeah, I can't wait till you can watch the games on Facebook. They play music throughout the entire thing, and every single game that night starts at the exact same time.
I've given Liv a chance because I'm like, I just want to watch.
It's horrific.
It's not an entertaining
It's horrific
product. Until the PIF sponsors the Winged Wheel podcast. And then, oh boy, the Four Aces are my favorite golf team.
Yes.
It's so weird.
Boy, am I a big fan of the Crushers.
The logo's is dorky, but kind of cool.
Yes, the logo. How could I forget the logo?
Anyhow, read the article. It demonstrates a lot more about why this individual at the face of it raises a lot of eyebrows of, yeah, is this one actually going to be real? But the larger discussion I still maintain is worth having. Before we jump into overtime, did you guys see the $30,000 posting for the disassembled but still?
Oh my God. I can't believe we didn't open with this.
Do you know how many people sent me that listing?
I have been spammed on social media about Al the Octopus.
I honestly, one, we don't have $30,000. A shocking number of you begged to start a GoFundMe. You're all amazing. We're constantly blown away by how incredible our supporters are.
Where would we store it?
We could not take your money. And then what would we do with this studio? Is already we have plans for a bigger studio when, I move. But even then, I'm not sure I can afford enough house to
put it on your roof rack.
I am A-okay just using this as a lawn decoration. That's just takes up 50% of my front lawn just sitting there.
My lawn would still look better than all my neighbors.
It was the Al the Octopus from Joe Louis Arena, and I'm pretty sure Al Sabatka has signed every piece. There might be other signatures. It's a little bit of an awkward thing now, but still, everyone knows who's listened for a while how much we love the Al the Octopus history with the Red Wings. I hope they never go away from the Octopus as a logo. I want to see Al the Octopus again at playoff games. If the name Al is weird, change it. I don't care. I want to see the giant purple octopus. We wanted to buy that so badly. I think the listing has come down. I actually chatted quite a bit with the person who was selling it. And it was a sad story. They didn't want to sell it. They just, they basically needed to pay off some bills. They're a cancer survivor. So I messaged and I was like, I hope you do keep this. I would love to have found a way for us to get it, but we would have felt terrible taking people's money to do it. And where would we have put? We essentially would have brought it from his place in Windsor and probably just stored it with my family in Windsor.
Yeah.
Very cool though. And I hope it's landing or at least staying in a Red Wings fan home. Anyhow, really cool to see Ali Octopus. I want to see another genuine one lower from the Jumbotron at the LCA though. That's what we need to see. Let's jump into overtime on this shorter episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to support the show. Again, the bonus overtime episodes, the bonus off-season episodes, the giveaways, the Discord access, all that and lots more. You allow us to do things like host the Winged Wheel Podcast through the off-season and make it bigger and better. You allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation through initiatives like Winged Wheel Podcast Night in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings and the Grand Rapids Griffins. And you also allow us to do things like produce other content like Expected by Whom, hosted by Prashanth Iyer and Sean Shapiro. All of that and lots more. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. Let's take some questions from our patrons. Jan says, reading Tony Ferrari's latest prospect roundup for the Hockey News, it finally sank in for me that despite a desperate need, the Red Wings did not pick up a single right-handed defenseman in the draft, free agency, or trades. Once again, we're going into the season with Seider and Petrie plus Sandin Pellikka overseas and probably 2 seasons away. In fact, we actually lost a right-handed D in the Gibson trade. I don't have a question or solution here. Just want to say that seems bad. Maybe overpaying for Matt Roy would not have been the worst move considering how difficult it is to find these guys.
My short answer on this, even though it would be a much bigger conversation, is if you think Axel Sandin Pellikka is what I think he is, then you don't need to worry about right D, because Seider and ASP is your top two for ideally the next 10 years. And all you're trying to do at that point is spot fill on the bottom pair. And we've said it time and time again, you can get useful bottom pair D for nothing. And there's a million available in free agency every year, like we just saw this summer.
Like Justin Holl.
You don't have to go pay. But no, imagine the Red Wings, we go 5 years down the road. Seider is what he is. Sandin Pellikka is holding it down on the second pair, first power play. And you go sign Erik Gustafsson for 2x2.
Wasn't Matt Roy's contract a 5-year deal?
6-year deal for Matt Roy, which the Red Wings absolutely should not have signed, because even though he's great now, one of those contracts, I think we can all agree the back half is probably going to be pretty rough. But if your top 4 D is set with good key players, which we hope will be Edvinsson and Seider and ASP, and then pick another prospect you think might be good or another free agent, and all you're worrying about is the bottom pair, there are always options available. I only worry about the pipeline in terms of positionality for guys that are going to be quote unquote impact players. Now, everybody will have an arbitrary cutoff wherever that number is, top 6, top 9, top 3, top 4, whatever. But bottom depth players are a dime a dozen. And it sounds so harsh to say, but we see it every year, time and time again. Tyler Mott, ideal fourth liner. Red Wings got him for basically league minimum. Like, Erik Gustafsson, going to probably be power play number 1, adequate on the third pair, 2x2. Your system, you need to worry about the top end. The depth, who cares?
Yeah, if you're a good team who is arguing a lot over your players who are, playing 11 minutes a night, that is a great spot to be in. I hope the Red Wings are back in that spot again one day. Go to the discussion for any fan base that is, projected to be a second round or better in the playoffs. That's what they're arguing about. They're like, such and such Lehtinen is making 1.6. He shouldn't be making anything over 1.4. We should be bringing up this. Like, that is the kind of conversation of a team who has their top 6 forwards, their top 4 defense set. And Detroit is so far away. It's kind of like the cousin of the argument of, do you bring in a Mitch Marner type if he's available? And people talk a lot about, playoff performances or how much he shows up physically in the playoffs or off-ice drama. That's not ideal, and we don't want him for that reason. Right. When was the last time we had to worry about playoff performances? Let's get there first.
Yeah, a guy at work said that to me, and I was like, playoffs? Sounds great. I would love for Mitch Marner to underperform in the playoffs. It means we're playing in the playoffs.
Good problems to have. Moving on here, Winging It from Boston says, I actually don't hate the Veleno deal, but best case scenario has to be that Marco Kasper outperforms him in camp in the exhibition season, and Yzerman is forced to try and trade him to clear the roster spot. Well, it wouldn't be just him. Like, there would be other players he could, outperform. Tyler Mott could be buried, for example. Like, it's not just Veleno.
Yeah, Veleno's 24. The ideal situation here is still the old players get outperformed and waived, but we'll call that unlikely.
If a player, let's talk about good problems to have. If a player, who wasn't projected to make the roster makes it on and forces their hand, like Danielson or Kasper or Mazur, excellent. Then, you have to GM your way out of it, but that's a good problem to have. Clint Benesh says, when a team cuts a coach, they still get paid unless they sign with another team, right? Why doesn't it work the same for players? Suter is currently being paid by 3 teams. That seems crazy. So you're right to a degree. Let's say Evan is head coach of the Detroit Red Wings and he's making $5 million a season. He gets fired with, a year left on his contract. If then the Boston Bruins hire him during, the time where he's supposed to be paid by the Red Wings, if the Bruins agree to pay him $3.75 million, the Red Wings are on the hook for the difference, the $1.25 million. Now, the thing is, people might say, well, why doesn't the coach just sign with the new team for like $500,000? And then the Red Wings are on the hook to essentially pay Boston's coach for the entire year. the NHL steps in and says, no, you have to sign them to a reasonable contract so you don't burn your old team. That's
hilarious.
Yeah. So that's the kind of the nuance there, and it's different than players because players that has cap implications, and coaches don't count against the cap at all.
But also the player way of doing that is very similar, because for a player to get essentially fired is bought out, and then they are only getting a fraction of the money that they were getting, 2/3.
Depending on what kind of buyout.
Yeah, exactly. You don't see many of the 1/3 buyouts because young players don't get bought out all that often, but they're getting 2/3. And more often than not, we see these players go out in free agency after getting bought out and make that difference back on a contract with another team. In a lot of cases, they actually come out ahead financially. So it's not the same thing exactly, but it's kind of the same dynamic.
It's a dream.
That's Evan's dream job right there. Player, coach, whatever, fired, bought out, just paid to not play.
Ryan Suter's getting paid by 3 teams to be a below average NHL defenseman. That is literally Evan's dream.
It could have been the Red Wings once upon a time.
You look at players who get their money and, they just they give up after that. It turns into the country club. I think sometimes that's applied to players unfairly, but it is very real. And what was a big issue in Minnesota? Suter and Parise, they called it the country club there. They got their money, they cashed out, they ran that dressing room and the team essentially, and they just weren't the players that they paid for back in the day. So there's a risk to signing players to a long-term, a lot of money, because depending on the person, you're not going to get 100% effort from them for the rest of their careers. Like Evan, for example. Would you, if you got paid, like if you got the big contract?
Man, would it be hard to show up to work every day?
Fully guaranteed?
Oh. I don't know, some of those NFL players or whatever professional sports league, guaranteed money just seems like the kiss of death.
It would
be difficult. That's the only reason why I'm not a professional athlete.
That's right.
Because I can't get over that financial dilemma.
That and that one knee injury, right?
I'm sure the listeners have heard several of my previous injuries this episode. I'm like a popcorn machine over here. Cracking all the time.
Your body, my money was on Brad's body falling apart sooner than yours, but
I'm rapidly
COVID hit you hard,
up.
Man. It is a regular occurrence for me to send Evan stills of him from the podcast of like him like bursting from the seams at his pants.
Yeah.
I'm not a nice friend. Alex DeBrink 182 says, what's your favorite Datsuk moment that's not a highlight reel? Think along the lines of funny moments, interviews, commercials, etc. Shout out to I Trust My Eyes to Dr. Romani. You should too.
For some reason, the first moment that jumped into my mind, don't know if it's necessarily my favorite, is when he played Keep Away with Trevor Thompson.
Yeah, that's a classic.
That's a good one. I think just the general idea that Pavel Datsuk and Brett Hull, when they played together, excellent chemistry, prolific line as Brett Hull was, exiting his career. Pavel Datsuk came onto the scene, couldn't understand a lick of what the other was saying to one another.
That's so crazy too. Like,
so funny
to have that chemistry. You can't communicate with one another, but you can communicate through your insane amount of talent.
Oh, I have an answer. So we know CBC, now Sportsnet's tradition of when a team wins the Stanley Cup, at the end of the broadcast, they run through all the players on the screen one at a time. It's just like a video of them just shoulders up saying, hi, my name's, so-and-so. I'm from Kitchener, Ontario, and my favorite player growing up was, pick a name. The best one of all time is still Jaromir Jagr. He's like, I'm Jaromir Jagr. I'm from the Czech Republic. My favorite player growing up was Jaromir Jagr. Datsuk's might be the only one that comes close because he's like, my name's Pavel Datsuk. I'm from name I can't pronounce in Russia. And my favorite player growing up, I know have favorite player. Just the only player in the history of the broadcast to go, I don't have a favorite player.
I was too busy practicing with weights on my ankles.
That was the most Pavel Datsuk audio I could ever imagine in my head.
There's also the one where he's doing an interview and his ringtone is, I feel good, na, 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 and he just starts boogieing to it during the interview.
Who was it in the massage room? Him and Dan Cleary when they were asking Siri who is the Magic Man?
Yeah, that was funny. That was from HBO 24/7.
I have to go back and rewatch that.
Oh, God, that was such a good series. Brad's Punchable Face says, let's say hypothetically Newsy isn't the coach of the future. Do you think Yzerman would take a long look at Dan Watson for head coach? Obviously, if he has continued success with the Griffins. Yeah, at the very least, a long look. And not that I think Newsy's necessarily, on the hot seat. I actually push back against that argument quite a bit when people bring it up. But if you look at a hypothetical where the Red Wings were looking for a coach, Dan Watson would probably be the betting favorite, depending on who else is out there.
Couple ways to look at this. One, for all the obvious reasons, yes, absolutely yes, he should get a look in Detroit. Not that I would do this, but I think the counter argument here would be, A, the last time the Red Wings brought up a very promising coach from Grand Rapids didn't work out that well. And B, if the Red Wings go back-to-back with first-time NHL head coaches and it doesn't go poorly, teams usually revert back to, we're going to go find a guy who's been there, done that. So that would probably be the big disadvantage to Dan Watson, because are they going to go 3 first-timers in a row? Most NHL organizations do not do that. So I could see it going either way, but I think it would be an uphill battle for him, even though he may very well be the most deserving if it were to happen.
I haven't wanted to bring it up because I don't want to give a lot of airtime to a hypothetical discussion. It seems unfair because it's different than a player, but there's a lot of noise of, if Derek Lalonde doesn't achieve the playoffs this season, is he on the hot seat? And I think there's a lot more of the yes answer from non-Red Wings media, like the national sphere. And I understand objectively why people might think that, but I really can't help but look at, it just depends on the how, right? Because the Red Wings don't exactly have a definitely this team is making the playoffs roster.
Well, a couple things. So first, yeah, they have set their benchmark last year. He's got to get close to that this year, unless there's just a billion injuries. He's got a very similar
points-wise.
Yes, he's got a very similar roster as to what he had last year. If they go from, low 90s in points to low 80s in points, that's going to be a problem. There's fair or unfair, it'll be a problem. But the reason it's getting brought up is because I forget what outlet put it out, but the ranking of coaches on the hot seat, and Derek Lalonde was number 1. But the context behind that is, if you look at all the teams that are in prime position, that they're right on that make or break moment, and usually that's where coaches get fired. You look at Minnesota, you look at St. Louis, et cetera, they all just fired their coaches within the last year. So he's the last guy standing of the guys in the middle tier. So it's not that he is on the hot seat. It's just that everybody who got booted.
Who's on the hot seat is like such a changing with the weather type discussion too, right? Like Edmonton just went in the tank, made a coaching change, and then went to the Stanley Cup Finals. So those types of things can change on it at an instant. Maybe the Leafs lose like 15 into the first 20 games, and they say, "Oh, we screwed up with Craig Berube. We're bringing in Joel Quenneville," and then they go on a run. Like, these lists change at an instant, and context really does matter.
Can you imagine the Leafs do another quick coach change? Not that Keefe was quick, but like that's what happens again. That'd be the leafiest thing to ever happen.
If they go through another coach before they change anything in the core of that team, I think Steve Dangle might jump off the CN Tower.
Brendan Shanahan has done the best job. He's like Keanu Reeves in The Matrix, just dodging bullets.
Oh my God. Like, the fact that he's even there this year is nothing short of a miracle for him. I'm sure one day he went home, and I have a Brendan Shanahan shirt on. Like, he's my favorite player of all time. But you can't look at his tenure in Toronto and say, yes, he's dodged a few arrows. Like, definitely at some point he has successfully deflected blame, and he goes home and looks at his wife and goes, "Oh, I got away with another one.
Yeah,
you're here for another year."
He's basically Jim Carrey in The Mask at this point.
You love your old movie references.
Tell me Jim Carrey in the 90s wasn't top 3 funniest.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, for all of us. But you're on it today.
I'm rattled because of how my night went.
Because it is well past the time for you to be able to catch your twisters.
I have to, and it's not like, oh, I can't watch it tonight, I gotta watch it tomorrow. It's Friday now. I'm waiting another 5 days to see this thing. And the reviews coming out of this thing that I've been seeing are good.
Yeah.
My hopes are high. The anticipation is high.
Speaking of that, before we wrap up on the Winged Wheel podcast, we're doing a thing, and much like the Alley Octopus, should have led with this. Winged Wheel Podcast Summer Vacation. We talked a lot about our bonus content that's going to be hockey related. We're also going to do stuff for some reason you guys like us and you want to see what we get up to during the off season. So we have some plans for some really kind of carefree, loose, fun content. So we're going to do a rewatch of the, I believe, 1996 classic, Brad's favorite Twister. And we're going to have a drinking game in there. It's going to be a lot of fun if you guys want to watch along. We're going to do a kind of, if anyone watches YouTube golf, we're going to be doing our own version, and apologies in advance for what you see. Evan saw.
You're going to have to put a content warning at the start of that video.
I'm going to have to send money to everyone to apologize for what they see. If I play anything like I played like today.
You're going to really test the limits of shot tracer.
Why? It's not going to go in the air.
We'll just make it green. No one will know where your shot went because it'll be along the ground.
Brad, I opened with a par and then I made 7 straight doubles.
Hell yeah.
Today was front end my worst round of golf since I started golfing last year. It was a tough scene. Anyways, we're going to golf and that'll be fun. You'll get to see how much better Evan is than me. Then we're going to do other things like everyone knows my passion for poutine. It's going to be a lot of fun. So for our patrons, that's going to be a nice bonus for them.
Speaking of patrons and golf, remind me when we're recording the Patreon. I have a picture on my phone I need to show you guys that's golf related because I may have a really weird, crazy story that came from my cousin this weekend.
Nice little teaser for our Patreon exclusive. All right, we're going to wrap up and record that. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. We'll be back with you next week, barring anything insane happening. And no, a Husso buyout is not emergency episode worthy. I'm telling you right now. Thank you to all of our listeners. If you're a new listener, welcome to the show and the Winged Wheel podcast off season. If you're a listener of old, appreciate you tuning in for all this time. Thank you to all of our patrons. We could not do any of this without you. If you want to support us on Patreon, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. And if you want to support the show, but Patreon's not for you, another way that really helps is leave us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you tune in. If you're on YouTube, give the thumbs up, leave a rating, leave the thumbs up, subscribe, tell a friend about the show. It really does help. To all of our name level supporters on Patreon, thank you so much. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Victor Zetterberg, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Cronner's Left Knee, Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Carl Brutana Nanaluski, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Seider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, Eric Hill, God Creatives, Give Blood Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, Jim Kalmbach, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Rawl, Pud, Riley, Enright, Ryan Britt, Scott Martin, Skeletor, Screen Lube, that's what I appreciate about you. The live must live a life alive, not just live like a loser lives their lively life. Thank you, Arjun. The Iser Type, Tiger McDougall, brand new name level supporter. Welcome, Tiger, to the Dub Club. Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Iser Plan Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheeseback Army, Sam Bankson, AA Ron, AB, Adam Rose, All Motor No Hands, Axel, Sandy Pelica, Bellingham Acid Balls, Chimkim Nuggets, Chuck Buffchest, the Tarpless Goon, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheeseback Space Force, Connor Layton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsukes, Dangleberries, D-Bots, Eric Nance, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, Ian, Jackson Hole, Wyoming Truther, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, JM Rhapsody, Joe and Reese's Pickle and Boot Shop, who's a brand new name level supporter. Welcome to the Dub Club. Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans Derogatory, John Ingles, Josh Yelton, Keenan O'Donohue, Brad is Wrong and Plays Like Sprong, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hall, Michigan Boy Navs Country, Ophelia, Steven, The Hodag, The Hat 123, Trent Thorough, Wings and Pizza, Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We'll talk to you next week. Maybe. Unless Yzerman changes that.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.